Hello and welcome to yet another stone of hardware skimmed across the retro gaming pond with ReplayRetro. Yeah, these are getting worse. I'm Matt, and on today's show we take a look at a system so obscure there wasn't even an advert for the intro, as we examine the Corp Gamate, Gamate, as we examine the Corp Gamate. Now, normally when we look at the systems which foolishly tried to challenge the might of Nintendo's unstoppable Game Boy, I'll write a pretty baity video description in which I suggest that maybe this latest pretender actually managed to dethrone the king, before I go on to show why that just didn't happen. This time though, it's fair to say the Gamate could never really have dreamt of such a lofty victory, struggling as it did to even take on the likes of the Watara Supervision. In fact, it pretty much only really took on the Megaduck, and that's a fight without a winner. As a result, information about this system is extremely hard to come by. Founded in 1982, Corp was a Taiwanese game developer, producing games for the Atari VCS and later for the Famicom, as well as by extension the Nintendo Entertainment System. To be fair, they were a pretty decent developer too, producing one of the only VCS games to feature speech synthesis with 1983's Open Sesame. Corp also manufactured a number of clone consoles and pirate multicarts, with later ones even being so bold as to advertise the Gamate on the back. But it wasn't until years later, when the company teamed up with chip manufacturer United Microelectronics Corporation, that they produced their own unique hardware to enter the portable gaming market. Around the same time, some of the biggest players in the industry were also preparing their own challenges to the Game Boy's throne. Atari would hit the market first with the Lynx in 1989, with Sega expected to follow up the next year with their Game Gear, around the same time as NEC turned their PC Engine home system into a handheld. But where these all tried to outdo Nintendo with expensive and power-hungry full-colour screens, Corp decided to go in a different direction, and would instead try to match the Game Boy, seeking just to improve on its design while still keeping the things that made it great. As a result, the Gamate would feature a very similar 160 by 144 pixel 4-shade black and green screen with manual contrast adjustment and no backlight. This would ensure that its 4 AA batteries would hold out far longer than the measly 5 hours those expensive full-colour systems could achieve, bringing it much closer to the 25 hours of Nintendo's offering. Later models would also see the screen upgraded in an attempt to reduce some of the ghosting, which was a common problem in early LCD handhelds, most notably in Tiger's 1997 Gamecom, where the ghosting is so bad most of the games are rendered unplayable. Designed by a Michael Chen, at least according to patents filed by Corp, the system would be powered by a UA6588F 8-bit CPU manufactured by UMC. This would later be replaced by an NCR 81489 chip, supported by some kind of secondary UMC chip. From what I can figure out, these are both running somewhere between 2.2 and 4.4 MHz, which either makes it half as powerful as the CPU found in the Game Boy, or slightly more powerful, depending on crystal versus clock speeds, but again, information is extremely limited and open to interpretation. Crystal versus clock speeds, but again, information is extremely limited and open to interpretation.
Oh my god, he didn't even understand how processors work. No rage!
Either way, both versions were based around the popular 6502 chip from MOS Technologies. That CPU is then backed up by 16 kilobytes of RAM across 2 chips, just like the Game Boy, and both consoles feature mono sound from their single onboard speaker with optional stereo sound supplied via the headphone socket. By keeping close to the Game Boy's specs, Corp could keep costs down, which allowed them to release the system in 1990 at a highly competitive price. In the UK, this was just £59.99, making it £10 cheaper than the then current retail price of the Game Boy, and just over 1/3 the price of the Game Gear, making it seem like a very wise choice. Games were also reasonably priced too, at around £15 each, no doubt making it a very attractive prospect to parents. International sales were handled by regional distributors, such as Cheetah in the UK, who were well known for their line of Commodore and Spectrum joysticks, while in its home nation of Taiwan, the system would be called the Superboy, presumably in reference to its mascot, who also got his own game to take on Mario. Bizarrely, in China, the system would have the far more interesting name of Super Child Prodigy. Ironically, both of these names being easier to pronounce than the hideous contraction that is Gamate. Undoubtedly the result of someone trying to put two words together without actually understanding the language. While the G1002 system is by far the most common version of the Gamate, early marketing shows the G1001 model with a slightly more wedge-shaped shell, along with a different D-pad design, button recesses and speaker grille. Again, this alteration seems to have happened early in the system's life, but before the CPU and screen changes. A white version with red buttons was also released at some stage. Now that we've pieced together some kind of a backstory for the Gamate, let's take a look at the system itself and a few of the games. So as you can see, the Gamate is laid out in a landscape orientation with controls on the sides of the screen. Unlike the Game Boy, which was more portrait and slightly clumsier in design, I always feel. I have got a Game Boy here for some size reference, and you can see that they are very much a similar, if not the same size. The Gamate may be slightly, ever so slightly bigger. I do think this size similarity was deliberate, as I think Gamate wanted to make sure that this would fit into your pocket, just like the Game Boy fit into a pocket quite well. Whereas the Lynx, the Game Gear, the PC Engine GT, they just couldn't fit into your pocket at all, unless you had massive pockets, like maybe if you were MC Hammer. But then you'd probably be rich enough to have, if you were MC Hammer, you'd be rich enough to have all the consoles, so, I mean, you wouldn't be able to carry them all, even. But then again, you'd have other people to carry your... Anyway, back to the Gamate. Taking it off the stand here, it is a really nice thing to hold. It feels really solid and really chunky and really well built. Unlike a lot of these Hong Kong original type systems, as they are known, it sits really well, and your thumbs automatically go to the D-pad and the buttons, and it's no difficulty getting to select and start either. And it's important to remember that this landscape orientation pretty much became the standard. The Game Gear did it, the Lynx did it, and the Game Boy would eventually concede and go this way itself with the Game Boy Advance. And of course, even up to the DS, technically that's a landscape system. So, BitCorp were right, I think, to choose this, and it does feel a lot more comfortable in your hand than a Game Boy, I think, and I can already hear the comments being angrily typed. Even just this little indentation here, which gives you somewhere to grip, it all works really well. I really like it. You can also see up here you have your mono speaker for mono sound. However, the games were programmed in stereo as well, and if you want stereo sound, then you just plug your stereo headphones into the phone's jack at the bottom there, the volume of which can be adjusted just here. Over here we have a 6-volt DC input so that you can run the system off the mains. However, with how long the batteries last, chances are you won't really need to, but it could be that they were also planning on having car chargers and the like for gaming on the go, which would have been a good idea, and many other systems did. Looking around to the back, you can see there are 2 battery compartments, spacing the weight out quite nicely for the 4 AA batteries. You have the system serial number, which I believe breaks down to this one being manufactured in 1991 and being the 5272nd system. You can also see that this is, of course, the 1002 model, and the usual FCC compliance nonsense. You also have the cartridge port on the back there, which we'll come to in a moment. On the top, you have your power button, your contrast, and just behind this little cover is the external connector, which would have been used for the link cable. Interesting little note is if you do turn the console on without a game inserted, the screen will display this kind of, if you can make it out on the camera, this kind of weird, glitchy, bizarro pattern, which indicates that this is the version 2 screen, so the slightly better blurry screen. If yours has vertical lines instead, then that means you've got the original, slightly worse blurry screen installed on your console, and there's not a lot you can do about it, so, you know, ha. The games themselves come in these little protective slip cases, which are quite nice, though a little bit fiddly, and you'll note that they come on cards. The data, you can just kind of see actually, if the light catches it right, that there are 2 chips there. That's where the data is for the games. And of course, don't touch Golden Finger by hands. You can touch it with whatever else you want. You know, your feet, your tongue, ears, other bodily components, and yeah, you can do that, but I wouldn't. That is, of course, the Golden Finger there, which is the contacts. A lot of systems did use cards like this, like the PC Engine and the original Master System games also came on card. However, I believe the pins on this are very similar, if not the same, as those of the card-based MSX games. Though I may be wrong, as I don't own any of those, so it's just an assumption. Obviously, as the very well thought out instructions tell you to do, you simply pop the cartridge into the back of the console, press it down, and then when you slide the power switch across, you'll be ready to play Cubed Up. As the system boots, you get this somewhat familiar startup intro sequence, followed by, admittedly, what sounds like terrible music. But I promise it kind of grows on you, but probably not in the 2 minutes that we're going to be playing this. So who can guess what Cube Up is? By the fact that there's like a Russian castle in the background and this menu looks exactly the same as the Game Boy version of Tetris. That's right, it's Tetris! A slightly slow and wonky version of Tetris, but Tetris nonetheless. Now, as always, I will make the excuse that I am playing it through a viewfinder, which does make this really, really difficult. Seriously, I quite like that music now. Yeah, obviously I am playing through the viewfinder, which does make it more difficult. And I'm also terrible at all games, so, you know, that's another thing. As you can see, it's not really a bad version of Tetris. It does pretty much what you expect. You know, don't think I would have been disappointed by this. I mean, I don't like the fact that any time you're pressing a button, it makes noise. Apart from down, apparently. Down doesn't make noise. That's interesting. Oh, that's going to be an unwise decision putting that there, isn't it? Ah, panic. I know that looks foolish, but it wasn't, honest. Trust me, I'm not a doctor. Okay, before I wind up, getting addicted to playing Tetris, because honestly, it is a perfectly playable version, I think we will move on to the next game. Next up then, we have Devil Castle. A fairly competent platformer, in fairness, where you go around. Oh god, this is going to be really difficult. This is going to be That's a boulder, I can't kill that. This is going to be so difficult with the viewfinder. Fairly competent platform where you seem to go around and you're trying to get into various rooms. You have like a Castlevania style whip and or like mace type thing, I suppose. See what's in here. Ominous music, but it doesn't look like there is anything. You can neither jump nor fight when you're in these rooms, although it looks like you might be able to kick. So it doesn't look like there's anything in there. Kill the flying thing. Anything in this? Ooh, there is a person in this one. Can we give her a slap? Oh, I'm assuming that's to buy something. Oh, can I not buy it because I don't have any money? Okay, no. And she leaves. Oh, she didn't take her eyes off me. She left the room backwards. I don't blame her. I mean, what am I doing in Devil's House? That jump is crazy big. I'm assuming more of these rooms... Does select do anything? No? Still doesn't? No? I'm assuming more of these rooms eventually have stuff in, rather than you just finding one crazy old woman. It's probably quite difficult for you to make out here, but the graphics are actually quite good. I quite like this. And again, with it being quite a slow-paced game, the screen blur is not a problem. I'm sure there is more to this game later on. But yeah, overall doesn't look too bad. You can see a little bit actually of the screen blur there when the screen is all moving. But again, I don't think it's much worse than the Game Boy. Ah, am I looking for a key? Is that for a key? Fair enough. Oh, that's a boulder, can't be killed. Yeah, you get the idea. Next game. So last up then we have Baro Revenge. This is for revenging the Pharaoh, obviously. Okay, seriously? That's a bit of a build-up. Okay, so these are coins. Quite a nice chunky platformer this. Again, you can see some motion blur on the character there moving. But I wouldn't say it's enough to make it unplayable, and I'm playing it through the viewfinder. So if it's going to be any unplayable for anyone, it's going to be me. Can I climb the rope? Oh. It's very difficult on viewfinder. Whoa. Yeah, motion blur a little bit more pronounced here, but it's not really causing many problems. Alright, it is probably worse than the Game Boy's motion blur. Oh, I can't get on the rope anymore. There you go. But it's certainly not unplayable. It's only really on fast-paced things like Arkanoid. Did I die? Did I die? Where did I go? What? Ah, I'm at the bottom. Fair enough. Yeah, it's only really on things like Arkanoid where, you know, you have to hit a tiny ball that's moving at speed that the screen blur would be a problem. And to be honest, those were the kind of games that people were trying to move away from anyway. Oh, fell. Game over. And what a perfect place to end. In 1992, Corp went bankrupt, citing operational difficulties, and it seemed the Gamate was dead. However, UMC instead took over production of the hardware and games, where it would live on for another 2 years before finally being discontinued in 1994. Interestingly, it's during this time that some of the system's most advanced games were produced, including features such as character selection and password-based continues. Things which we would see as basic, heck, even the Game Boy saw them as basic, but things which BitCorp had previously never bothered to include. Sadly, these games are far rarer and certainly not cheap. To make matters worse, they can be difficult to find in the UK, as Cheetah had also ceased trading in 1993, ending the system's UK availability. There are believed to be between 70 and 80 games released for the system, with new ones still occasionally being discovered, and no definitive list has been established. Some games are unknown but presumed to exist based on gaps in the numbering structure of the serial numbers on the games. As a result, while the system is emulated by both MES and MAME, the ROM library is far from complete. It's currently also believed that the system's link cable was never released. However, the ever-active homebrew community has attempted to build such cables with some degree of success, though it does seem that some versions of the system are incompatible with each other, and that communication is flaky at best, with consoles often crashing and games failing to load. However, this may of course be down to some missing components that the official lead would have included. A rumoured battery pack charged via the console also never emerged, while reports of a Gamate colour discovered in Mexico seem to be false as well. While sales of the Gamate certainly never posed any real threat to the Game Boy, it did do some things right. Firstly, it targeted the budget end of the market rather than aiming too high. It attempted to improve the form factor and ergonomics of the Game Boy with what is, in my opinion, a much better layout, and unlike other similar systems, the build quality is very impressive, with no hideous blobs of epoxy hiding its innards. In fact, it can be pretty difficult to pin down exactly why the console failed so badly. Sure, the screen wasn't fantastic, but neither was the Game Boy's when it came to small, fast-moving items. In the end, as we've found time and time again, it likely comes down to the games, with the system never really having that killer app to make it a household name, while the Game Boy ultimately locked down classic after classic after classic, even managing to extend its life in the late 90s with Pokemon Red and Blue, games which spawned one of the most successful franchises of all time, and bought the system a few more years, long after it should have been forgotten. The Gamate was also let down by poor marketing from distributors who lacked the budget to really push the console, whereas Nintendo and the other big players could afford to run big campaigns across multiple media formats. In 1995, UMC would go on to produce the 16-bit Super ACAN under their Funtech subsidiary to compete against the likes of the Super Nintendo and Sega Mega Drive. But that's a story for another day. Don't forget, you can follow Replay Retro on Twitter, you can like us on Facebook, and if you really want, you can support the show via Patreon. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.